The cold, sterile air of the shelter was thick with silence. The usual barking and whining of dogs had quieted as the evening settled in. But inside one dimly lit kennel, a pair of striking blue eyes reflected the faint glow of a flickering overhead light. Luna, a 6-year-old Siberian Husky, lay curled in the farthest corner of her cage, her once thick fur now dull and matted. She barely lifted her head when a worker passed by, a resignation in her gaze that only came with understanding the inevitable. Tomorrow was the day. The shelter was overcrowded, and Luna had spent too many months waiting for a home that never came. She wasn't a puppy anymore. Her breed was high maintenance, requiring patience and experience. And after being surrendered by an owner who no longer wanted her, she had given up hope. The staff had tried. They posted pictures online, showcased her at adoption events. But one by one, other dogs were chosen. Puppies wagging their tails, small breeds perfect for city apartments. But Luna? Too big. Too much work. Too much of a burden. And so, the decision was made. As the shelter worker locked up for the night, Luna let out a long, weary sigh, resting her head on her paws. Her body ached from months on the hard kennel floor, but more than that, her heart ached from loneliness. She had once been loved, once had a family. Now, she had nothing. What she didn't know was that fate was about to intervene, and it would come in the form of an 82-year-old woman with nothing left to lose. The morning sun filtered through the shelter's small windows, casting long beams of light across the rows of kennels. The staff moved with quiet efficiency, feeding the remaining dogs, preparing adoption paperwork, and making their rounds. But in the back room, away from the hopeful barks and wagging tails, Luna lay still in her cage. She didn't lift her head when footsteps approached. She didn't even flinch when the sound of keys jingled, the latch of her kennel clicking open. A worker knelt beside her, stroking her fur gently. "I'm so sorry, girl," she whispered. Luna didn't move. Then, just as the worker stood, a voice echoed down the hall, soft but firm. "Wait." The worker turned, startled. An elderly woman stood in the entrance, leaning on a cane, her eyes locked on Luna. She was small, with wisps of silver hair tucked beneath a knitted hat, her frame slightly hunched. But there was something in her gaze, something that froze the moment in time. "I'll take her." The room went silent. The worker hesitated. "Ma'am, are you sure?" "Luna needs." "I know what she needs," the woman interrupted. "And I know what I need." She took a slow step forward, her cane tapping against the tiled floor. Luna finally looked up. For the first time in weeks, her ears perked slightly. The woman smiled. "That's a good girl." The staff exchanged glances. There were procedures, paperwork, policies to follow. But the woman's voice left no room for argument. She had already made up her mind. That afternoon, Luna stepped out of the shelter and into the world once more. The woman, who introduced herself as Margaret, walked beside her with slow but steady steps, her cane tapping with each stride. Luna hesitated at first and used to freedom after months of confinement. But as they reached the car, something shifted. Margaret opened the passenger door and patted the seat. "Come on, sweetheart." Luna hesitated, then cautiously she climbed in. Margaret smiled. As they drove away, the shelter faded into the distance. Luna didn't look back. Margaret's home was small but warm, nestled at the edge of a quiet neighborhood where trees lined the streets like silent guardians. The moment Luna stepped inside, she felt something she hadn't in months. Comfort. There was a plush dog bed waiting for her in the corner, a bowl of fresh water set out on the kitchen floor. Margaret moved carefully, her frail hand stroking Luna's fur as she murmured soft words of reassurance. "You and me, girl," she said. "We're going to take care of each other." Luna didn't understand the words, but she felt them. That night, for the first time in what felt like forever, she slept soundly. But peace never lasts forever. It happened just 3 weeks after Luna's rescue. Margaret had grown accustomed to Luna's presence. The way she followed her from room to room, the gentle weight of her head resting on her lap as they sat together in the evenings. But on this night, something was different. Luna paced near the front door, her ears twitching, her body tense. Every few seconds, she let out a low, uneasy whine. Margaret frowned. "What is it, girl?" Luna's gaze darted toward the window. Then, a noise. A soft click. Margaret's heart lurched. She wasn't imagining it. Someone was at the door. Before she could react, Luna moved. In an instant, the husky launched toward the entrance, her body pressing against it with a low, guttural growl. Then, glass shattered. Margaret gasped as a figure forced the door open, their silhouette illuminated by the dim porch light. A home invasion. Her hands trembled. Her cane was out of reach. But before fear could take hold, Luna lunged. The intruder barely had time to react before the husky struck, her teeth flashing as she snapped at his leg. He yelped, stumbling back, but Luna wasn't done. She barked furiously, her body a blur of movement as she drove him toward the doorway. Margaret fumbled for the phone, her fingers dialing with shaky urgency. 911. "What's your emergency?" There's someone in my house," she gasped. "But my dog, she's—" A cry of pain interrupted her. The man cursed, shoving Luna back, but she was relentless. She had been weak before, helpless before, but not now. Not when Margaret was in danger. The intruder, bleeding and panicked, made a split-second decision. He ran. Luna chased him out the door, her barks echoing into the night. By the time the police arrived, Luna was back inside, panting but triumphant. Margaret sat beside her, her hands buried in the husky's fur. "She saved me," Margaret whispered to the officer. "She saved my life." The officer nodded, glancing at the bloodied footprints outside. "She's a hero." Margaret looked down at Luna, her heart swelling with something she hadn't felt in a long time. Gratitude, love, purpose. She had saved Luna from death. And tonight, Luna had returned the favor. Margaret barely slept that night. Even after the police assured her the intruder was long gone, she sat in her armchair, Luna curled at her feet, unable to shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The officers had said it was likely a random break-in, a desperate man looking for easy money. But Luna's reaction, it wasn't just fear. It was something else. She had known, long before the door had been forced open, long before Margaret had even suspected anything, Luna had sensed the danger. And now, Margaret couldn't stop wondering. How? The next morning, Margaret called her son, David. He lived 2 states away, but he had always worried about her living alone. "I can come out there, Mom," he said, his voice thick with concern. "At least for a few days." Margaret glanced down at Luna, who was watching her with those intense blue eyes. "I think I'm all right," she said. "Luna's got my back." David sighed. "Yeah, about that. Mom, are you sure she didn't just react in the moment? You don't think she knew ahead of time, right?" Margaret hesitated. "I don't know," she admitted. "But it felt like she did." David didn't say anything for a moment. "Just be careful, all right?" She promised she would, but the uneasy feeling remained. In the days following the break-in, Margaret began to notice something odd. Luna had always been attentive, following her from room to room, always keeping an eye on her. But now her behavior was different. It started with the front door. Every night, as soon as the sun went down, Luna would position herself in front of it. She wouldn't sleep in her dog bed. She wouldn't curl up beside Margaret on the couch. She would stay, watching, waiting. Margaret tried to coax her away. "Come on, sweetheart, it's safe now." But Luna wouldn't budge. Then came the pacing. Margaret would wake up in the middle of the night to the soft sound of Luna's paws moving across the wooden floor. She wasn't restless. She was searching. For what? Margaret didn't know. Then, one evening, something even stranger happened. Margaret had just finished washing the dinner dishes when she heard Luna growl. Not a playful sound. Not a warning bark. A deep, primal growl that sent a shiver down Margaret's spine. She turned to see Luna standing at the back door, her body rigid, her hackles raised. Margaret's heart pounded. She followed Luna's gaze to the window, peering into the darkness beyond. Nothing. Just trees and moonlight. Still, Luna didn't relax. Margaret reached for her cane, unlocking the door with a trembling hand. "All right, girl, let's see what's out there." Luna moved cautiously, stepping onto the back porch, her ears flicking at every sound. Margaret scanned the yard. No footprints. No movement. And then, a noise. Soft, subtle, like something rustling through the bushes. Luna's growl deepened. Margaret's pulse quickened. "Who's there?" she called. Silence. Then, just as she was about to turn back inside, a flash of movement caught her eye. Something, or someone darted away into the woods. Margaret's breath hitched. Luna barked furiously, pulling against the invisible boundary of the yard, as if she wanted to chase after it. But Margaret grabbed her collar, holding her back. "No, girl. Not tonight." She locked the door behind them, her mind racing. Was it an animal? Another intruder? Or something worse? The next day, Margaret visited the local police station, recounting what she had seen. An officer, a young man named Torres, took notes as she spoke. "We'll send someone to patrol your area for the next few nights," he assured her. Could have just been a trespasser passing through. Margaret frowned. Luna's never acted this way before. And that man who broke in, what if he came back? Torres hesitated. "We did some digging. The guy who broke into your house? He's a known repeat offender. But here's the thing. He usually targets specific houses. Not random ones." A chill ran through Margaret. "What are you saying?" Torres rubbed his chin. "I'm saying it's possible your house was chosen." Margaret swallowed. "Why?" Torres shook his head. "We don't know yet. But if your dog is still on edge, I'd trust her instincts." Margaret left the station with a heavy heart. Something wasn't adding up, and Luna knew it. That night, as Margaret sat on her couch, staring at the crackling fireplace, an old memory surfaced, one she hadn't thought of in years. She had moved into this house nearly 3 decades ago with her late husband, Robert. It had been their dream home, nestled away from the city, a place of quiet and peace. But there had been something else, something about the land. Robert had once mentioned it, years ago, an old story, passed down by the previous owner. This property, he had said, was part of something much bigger, a hidden place people didn't talk about, the kind of place where things got buried, secrets. Margaret. She had laughed at the time, brushing off his words as nothing more than local folklore. But now she wasn't so sure. Had someone been looking for something? Had Luna sensed a threat Margaret couldn't see? And if so, what were they after? Determined to get answers, Margaret spent the following morning searching through old records. She dug through town archives, newspaper clippings, anything she could find about her property's history. And then she found it. A decades-old police report. A missing person. A body never found. Margaret's hands trembled as she read. The case had been long forgotten. Just another unsolved disappearance. But the location was clear. The last place the victim had been seen? Her backyard. Margaret felt her breath catch. She looked down at Luna, who sat beside her, watching her carefully. Had Luna known all along? Had she sensed the past reaching out from beneath the soil? Margaret placed a hand on her Husky's head, her heart pounding. The break-in, the figure in the woods, the missing person. It wasn't just a coincidence. Something, or someone was still looking for what had been buried. And Luna, she was the only one who had known it was never truly gone. Margaret sat in stunned silence, her frail hands gripping the yellowed police report. The air in the room felt heavier, thick with the weight of a past she had never known. Luna lay at her feet, her blue eyes locked onto Margaret's, as if she understood everything. And maybe she did. Margaret's mind reeled. The missing person, Elliot Grayson, had vanished 40 years ago. His last known whereabouts? The land her house now stood on. Had the break-in been about this? Had someone been searching for something buried long ago? A shiver ran down her spine. She needed to know the truth. And Luna, she was the key. That night, as the wind howled against the house, Margaret sat in her chair, watching Luna. The Husky had barely moved, her body tense, her ears flicking at every distant sound. She was waiting for something. Margaret took a deep breath. "Show me, girl." Luna lifted her head. Margaret steadied herself on her cane and walked to the back door. She hesitated, then stepped outside. The yard was bathed in silver moonlight, the trees casting long, eerie shadows. Luna moved cautiously beside her, her nose to the ground, her tail stiff. Then she stopped. Margaret followed her gaze. A spot beneath the old oak tree. Luna let out a soft whine, pawing at the dirt. Margaret's heart pounded. This is it. With trembling hands, she fetched a shovel from the shed. She hesitated. Then she dug. The first few inches were just soil, damp from the evening air. But then something different. A dull, hollow thud. Margaret gasped. Luna growled softly, stepping back. Margaret dropped to her knees, brushing away the dirt. And then she saw it. Wood. An old, rotting box, half buried beneath decades of earth. With shaking fingers, she pried it open. Inside, wrapped in faded cloth, was a bundle of papers, photographs, and something metallic, a locket, rusted with age. Margaret lifted the locket, prying it open. Inside was a photo of a young man, Elliot Grayson, and beside him, a woman. Margaret's breath hitched. She knew that face. It was her late husband's sister. The realization hit her like a thunderclap. Robert's sister, Evelyn, had been close to Elliot. Margaret had heard stories of their friendship, their whispered conversations. But then Evelyn had moved away, cutting all ties. Had she known something? Had Robert? Margaret sat back, her pulse racing. The past wasn't just buried here. It was tied to her family. A sudden snap of a twig made her freeze. Luna's ears perked. Then, a voice. I wouldn't dig any deeper if I were you. Margaret's blood ran cold. A figure emerged from the darkness, standing just beyond the reach of the porch light. A man, tall, broad-shouldered, his face partially obscured by the shadows. Luna growled, stepping protectively in front of Margaret. The man exhaled, shaking his head. So you found it? Margaret's grip tightened on the locket. Who are you? The man took a step closer. That's not important. What is important is that you leave that box where it is. Margaret's heart pounded. You broke into my house. Silence. Then, a slow nod. Margaret's hands trembled. Why? What are you looking for? The man's gaze flickered to the box. Something that should have stayed buried. Luna let out a warning bark, her fur bristling. The man stiffened. Call off your dog, lady. Margaret straightened, her fear hardening into resolve. No. The man's eyes darkened. Then, this is going to be a problem. Before Margaret could react, the man lunged. But Luna was faster. She sprang forward, her teeth flashing as she sank them into the intruder's arm. He let out a strangled yell, trying to shake her off, but Luna held on with everything she had. Margaret scrambled backward, her pulse hammering. Luna, go, she cried. The husky obeyed. She released the man just as Margaret grabbed the shovel, swinging it with all her strength. The metal struck his side with a sickening thud. He staggered, cursing. Then, without another word, he turned and ran into the woods, disappearing into the darkness. Luna barked after him, her body still tense. Margaret collapsed onto the ground, clutching her chest. It was over. For now. By the time the police arrived, the man was long gone. But the evidence remained. The box, the photos, the connection to her husband's family. Margaret sat on her porch, Luna curled at her side, as Officer Torres examined the contents. This is big, he murmured. That man, whoever he is, came back for this. He needed to keep it hidden. Margaret shuddered. But why? What was so important? Torres flipped through the papers, his expression darkening. Because these documents, they don't just confirm that Elliot Grayson went missing. He turned to Margaret. They prove he was murdered. Margaret's breath caught. Luna let out a soft whine, pressing against her. Torres exhaled. And if this guy was willing to break into your house to keep this buried, he's not done yet. Margaret's grip tightened on Luna's fur. She wasn't done either. Because now, she had to know the whole truth. And she wouldn't stop until she found it. Neither would Luna. Margaret sat on the porch, the morning sun casting a golden glow over the yard. The old oak tree stood strong, its roots entwined with secrets that had finally begun to surface. Luna lay beside her, resting her head on Margaret's lap, her blue eyes still alert despite her relaxed posture. The past few days had been a whirlwind of emotions. Fear, discovery, and ultimately, a newfound sense of purpose. The police had taken the evidence, confirming that the box contained crucial information about Elliot Grayson's disappearance. It was now an active investigation, and the man who had tried to silence the truth was being hunted. Margaret let out a shaky breath. It wasn't over. Not yet. But she wasn't afraid anymore. Because she wasn't alone. Luna's gift. Margaret ran her fingers through Luna's thick fur. She had always known dogs were loyal, protective, and loving. But Luna was something more. She wasn't just a pet. She was a guardian, a savior. Margaret thought back to the night of the break-in. If it hadn't been for Luna, she might not have survived. If Luna hadn't persisted, if she hadn't sensed something buried beneath the surface, both literally and figuratively, Margaret never would have uncovered the truth. And the truth mattered. Elliot Grayson had been forgotten for 40 years. His story had been erased, his name lost to time. But Luna had felt his presence. She had known something was wrong before Margaret ever did. Dogs were remarkable that way. Tuned into emotions, attuned to danger, and sometimes it seemed attuned to the whispers of the past. The police had shared something else with Margaret before they left. Elliot Grayson had owned a Husky. His neighbors had described the dog as fiercely protective, never leaving Elliot's side. After Elliot disappeared, the Husky had refused to leave the property, waiting by the house for a master who would never return. Margaret's heart ached at the thought. Had Luna, somehow, someway, sensed that lingering sorrow? Had she felt the echoes of another Husky's love and devotion, stretching across decades? It was impossible to say. But Margaret believed. She believed in Luna. She believed in the bond that animals shared with us, the way they saw what we could not, the way they protected us even when we didn't know we needed protecting. And she believed, with all her heart, that Luna had been meant to come into her life. In the days that followed, Margaret did what she could to help the investigation. She told her story to reporters, not for attention, but because Elliot's family, what was left of them, deserved to know the truth. And through it all, Luna never left her side. When Margaret walked outside, Luna was there. When she sat down to rest, Luna curled up beside her. And at night, when the house grew silent, Luna still watched the door. Not out of fear, but because she was a protector. Because that's what heroes did. Margaret looked down at Luna and smiled. She had been moments away from being euthanized, thrown away, forgotten. And yet, she had gone on to save a life, to uncover a long-buried truth, to change everything. Margaret exhaled, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. Maybe that was the real lesson in all of this. That no life, human or animal, was ever truly insignificant. That sometimes the ones the world cast aside were the ones who ended up making the biggest difference. Luna stirred, letting out a soft sigh. Margaret scratched behind her ears. Good girl. The past was no longer buried. And because of Luna, neither was the truth. And maybe, just maybe, neither was hope.